Okay, let's just kick off. So this is very much a continuation of the session we had on Tuesday afternoon. So let's straight back into it. I think we were just nearing the end of the first pack, so I'll hand back to Sudha to take us through. I think it's one more rule on the first pack, and then Susie will take us through the second pack around written and signed lines. Over to you, Sudha. Do you want to share the screen?
Yep. Just a second. Can everybody see now?
Yeah, definitely.
So one additional rule that we found out. Just a second. Sorry for that. So there was one additional rule when we were going through the set of rules that we saw, which was related to how syndicates are onboarded when the new risk is inducted in IROS. So this was related to MRC 21. MRC 21 was something that we had presented in last December. So at that point, what we had done was that we were validating that the syndicate number, which comes in the CDR, this syndicate number is an onboarded Lloyd syndicate. So we were making sure that the number is correct, the corresponding the number is correct, it is present in the Lloyd system, and it's a onboarded and a recognized syndicate. One thing additional that we also found out that the technicians do currently is that they also validate that the syndicate is has the operating year of account available. So whatever is mentioned on the MRC, the year of account, the syndicate should be valid for that particular year of account. So these syndicates in the system currently have a year of account from and to date. So our check will be to just validate that the CDR year of account is what it is present on the syndicate in the service that we have currently. So we are just updating this rule to have one more check for the syndicates.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, okay. Sorry, Kirsten, you have a question?
Yeah, so just tying up to one of the last pieces that we put into the CDR, which was year of account at syndicate level, which would sound as though that was going to support this. We introduced the multi-year of account so that when a policy either starts off or is endorsed to being 18 months or more, it will have a multi-select, so there would be a multiple years of accounts in the CDR. And as it was only just put into the CDR very late, I was just raising that. It wasn't really a pseudo question, pseudo statement.
Yeah, we're aware of that one, Kirsten. You're right. That is required.
There will be multiple year of accounts. Okay, so probably we'll have to just validate. We'll have to just think about it and validate both of them or more than one against the range that is available for the syndicate in that case.
Yes.
Does that answer your question, Kirsten?
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't really a question. It was more just clarification that the latter part of the CDR, which was tightened up only in the last 2 or 3 weeks, was filtering through.
If I might just comment, I think we need Lloyds Corporation to confirm that validation of year of account to syndicate is, from CDR through to gateway through to IPOS validation is everything it should be. They write the rules on year of account allocation, so they should sign off on these.
Okay, we'll pick it up.
Thank you.
Sorry, just one question on year of account. In our PAS, we only hold 1 year of account per policy. So even if there was an extension, you couldn't change it. Well, the year of account wouldn't change.
Gordon, this was per carrier. The carrier's going to put
sorry,
in their
right, okay,
year
sorry.
of account, yeah, rather
Okay,
than
sorry,
the
right,
underwriting
yeah.
year at the beginning. Yeah.
Are there any
Okay.
other questions then, or
Yeah.
should we move on to?
Well, I think if you're going to approach Lloyd's, I think a scenario to put to them is it conceivable that different syndicates can have different years of account for the same risk?
I think that was clarified in the CDR sessions that was correct.
Clarified by Lloyd?
Yes, it was clarified by Lloyd's.
Okay, fantastic. You've done it already.
I would double check, but that was why it went in at carrier level, because it
It'll
could
be-
potentially
I guess
different.
It was first. I guess it was. It'd just be good to know what the logic for. What's the scenario that requires that flexibility?
I think
Don't answer that now. Don't answer
no.
now. I think if we got the material from the conversation, I think it'd be good to know what is the scenario that produces that outcome. Different years of account for different syndicates on the same risk. Because I don't know what it is. I've grown up on it's the year of account for everyone. So
right, yeah.
yeah. So just curious to understand why Lloyd's think it's okay to have different years of account for different syndicates on the same risk. If someone can provide me with the details of that conversation, that'd be great.
Put it in the chat for you, Will.
Okay, do we move on to the second pack? If everyone's comfortable with the year of account amendment we just talked about. Steve, you want to take us through and we'll get the screen switched over.
Hold on, so I was just trying to find my microphone. Okay, can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the first few slides on the pack are the same as were at the start of the other pack. So I'm going to jump straight to slide 3, which is about what we're covering today. So today we're covering the rules for written, sign, line and order. For each of these rules, we want to confirm when a rule should be executed by placement life cycle journey, which customer group should this rule be executed for, and should the rule failing indicate an error or a warning to the placing platform, and does this vary by stage? So those are kind of the key questions, which are the same key questions as previously. So as before, I don't need to go through this one. We've got whether it applies to Lloyd's and company markets, and then the bit that shows how we'd operate it in the new digital world, which stages it would apply for, whether it would be a warning, an error, or whether, I don't think I've got any question marks in here. So hopefully that's clear to everyone. So we just jump straight into this section. So this is business validation rules for written, signed lines and order. So if we go to the current processing that DXC do. So at the moment, there are 4 rules that a DXC checks on written, signed lines and order. And there's a little bit of overlap amongst them because it's basically validating things against each other. So DXC currently check that written lines have been correctly apportioned as signed lines is dependent on the basis of written lines and the order percentage or the order amount. And where there's a clause allowing disproportionate signing, the signed lines didn't have to be proportionate. Not sure what the echo is. So these rules apply to both Lloyd's and company market during accounting and settlement. And basically, just at a high level, the MRC and MRC 17 and 18 kind of go together, because one is about the sort of order hereon, making sure it's been completed and it's correct with regards to the limit and sign lines. And then the second one is around the written lines and whether it's correct with regards to the limits and the signed lines. The second 2 are more around checking that the sign lines have been apportioned correctly. So based on the basis of sign lines, check they've been apportioned, and then MRC 20 is where the written lines need to be adjusted or signed down. It's checking that they've been sort of apportioned correctly. Yeah, that's basically what that is. And we'll come on to the sort of the way we've replaced it. And what we've looked to do here is not to take each rule one at a time, but to kind of pool all these rules together and work out, well, what is it that we need to do this in an automatic way rather than somebody manually checking that they're done and correct. I'll pause there. Has anyone got any questions so far? Okay, I'll carry on. Okay, so the next slide is really just a sort of bit of context around written sign line basis, because I'm sure actually everyone on this call knows all this stuff, but just to give a sort of refresher, sometimes the broker's not given 100% of the risk to place, and this can be presented in different ways. So the example is, if I've got a yacht for £1 million and I need to provide 80% of cover, it can be presented as two different ways. So it can be presented as a percentage of whole. So I can say it's an 80% sign line of 100% of the value. And when we're doing that, the order's applied to the sign line. And or I can present it the other way around and say it's 100% of the sign line of the 80% of the value. And when that happens, the order is applied during processing of premium and claims. And so basically, the key thing is when you're putting it on the MRC and on the CDR, that you're presenting it in the right way, so it's consistent with which you've chosen for your basis. So there's also part of whole and part of order, which are used when the order is expressed as a monetary value. So instead of having 80% of 100%, you'd have 80% of an amount, so 80% of £1 million. But hopefully that's something you're all familiar with anyway, but we've just put that in as context. So moving on to the next slide. This is where we've looked at what the check should be in the digital gateway for written sign lines and order. And again, they're applied for both Lloyd's and company markets. So we've taken the 4 existing rules shown in slide 3, created a refined set of rules summarised below and set out in more detail in the slides that follow. This refined set of rules will replace the existing rules and obviously will sort of be automatically run. So what we've got, I'll go through them, but as you'll see on the right hand side, there's
Can I ask the question?
Yes,
can I
of course
ask
you can.
the question? How often do the current rules find a problem?
That's a good question. And I couldn't honestly give you the right answer. I know that they raise queries on these. How often they raise a query, I don't know. I think sometimes
I know checking of slip orders has been challenging, let's say, for about 40 years. 40. It's always been a problem area in terms of bureau processing versus broker opinion on things and understanding of things. And it still is. I still get queries about it today. So I think it's important to understand how often does this validation result in a recognition of an error that is then corrected, and how much of this validation and the interaction back to the broker typically is just the bureau checker getting familiar with the way it's all put together. I think the origins of this are from old style slips and inky stamps and manual signing down, predating clever broker systems that do them automatically now. So I guess I'm just posing the question. I think you've explained it very well. I just think it dates from the 1970s as a set of validation rules, and I'm not sure. Happy to listen to underwriters because this is who you're doing it for. I think I'm not sure it's necessary. We should necessarily assume it all has a place in a digital market when data's moving differently. But that's just an opinion.
No, it's a very valid opinion. Ed, do you have any? Doesn't say Ed. Did you have any sort of comment on that?
Well, I guess one thing to probably need to consider is just because it's digital doesn't mean that the check goes away, it might reduce it. So even though it may pass the majority of the time, it shouldn't mean that we shouldn't validate it. That's, I guess, as Rob says, it's something that the carriers in the room were to comment on.
I'm just wondering if it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut. That's all I'm saying.
I guess where would you draw the line, Rob? Because I guess we could assume that people get the data right on most of these rules.
I would. For me, the purpose of a validation rule is to prevent something that could go wrong going wrong, and there's a degree of probability that you attach to the likelihood of it going wrong. So back to my original question, how often does the current application of these rules recognise and resolve an actual error? Don't let that stop the conversation. I just think perhaps go back. We could end up over-engineering a set of rules based on what was needed in 1975 rather than what's needed in 2025. That's my point.
And also to Rob's point, again, from a broker's perspective, there's a huge amount of validation on our PAS systems to make sure we don't get this wrong as well.
Hence, how often there's an error detected. And you must have that data in your tracker system. So.
Yeah, it's a question we can go back to DXE and ask.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'll do, I'll carry on with the rules that we've identified. And obviously you can ask any questions on those. So basically this bit's a summary of what's to come. So just at a very high level, these are the things that need to be done. So the first thing is to check that the order percentage or order amount has been populated dependent on the written or signed lines basis. And that basically is from rules 17 and 18 and traces back to the rules we've defined as 1 to 5. Check that the broker share percentage or broker share amount has been populated, again, dependent on the written or signed lines basis. No check is required on the sum of written lines for all participants, as these can add up to anything. So there isn't a check for that at the moment, and we don't propose to put one in because at written line stage, there isn't a limit on what they can add up to. Then at sign line says check that the sign lines add up to the correct total percentage. So that at the moment is rules 19 and 20. So we've moved that to rule 6. Check that for lines to stand, the written line equals the sign line. That's rule 8. And then check that the remaining written lines have been correctly apportioned as sign lines. If not, our assumption is that this should be flagged as a warning rather than an error, because disproportionate signing is sometimes allowed. So at the moment, DXC will look for the clause in the contract to check if disproportionate signing is allowed. We wouldn't be able to do that. So our assumption is basically if they are not apportioned correctly, then we would flag it as a warning. We wouldn't stop it going through because it might be correct if disproportionate signing is allowed, but it would at least flag it so that someone could check it. So the next slide is our key points for discussion. So the sign lines validation will only be applied once the sign line advice stage is reached. So basically that would be at the sign line advice stage and pre-accounting. So it wouldn't be checked before that. And then disproportionate signing is allowed if there's the same point I've just made. If there's a clause in the contract to allow this, but there's no flag to identify this in the CDR. So our assumption is we'll put this as a warning, not as an error. So I guess we.
Susie, sorry, what's an example of that? Is that where someone's, I don't know, someone's written, I'm trying to think of this quickly. Someone's written a 20% line, normally they'd sign to 10, but in this case, they're allowed to have 15.
Yeah, so I think in some contracts, there's a clause that allows disproportionate signing. So instead of signing everybody down by the same percentage, some people can be signed down by a different percentage.
But don't we just need to check that the sign line is equal 100, irrespective of?
If the broker share percentage is 100%,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, yeah.
Yes. But this is around, so rules, if I just go back to this slide, so the rules here 19 and 20 are making sure they've been apportioned correctly. So what we're saying is we'll check they've been apportioned correctly, but we have to be aware that sometimes they won't have been done proportionately.
Okay,
So
I think that goes back to Rob's point about, this is a rule from the 70s. I struggle that people would get that wrong.
Gordon, we've got an example that we see quite frequently, which is a factor of 3 carriers, so either 3, 6, 9 or whatever it is, carriers taking an equal share each when they're putting their lines down, which of course won't go down into 100%, but only by the 7th decimal place. So I'm just wondering what tolerance level that is if you actually have to mathematically squeeze the 7th decimal place to take up the 99.999, etc. It would technically be disproportionate.
I'll get that.
I don't think that's the scenario they're contemplating here, Kirstin.
No, I just say
think-
we do see it quite not infrequently. So
Yeah.
the system will
But-
allow the broker user to tweak the decimal place, but when it goes down the other end, it would be considered to be disproportionate. It might not be in the clause in the contract as such.
Yeah, I suspect that's down to tolerances and the like. And at the 7th decimal place, it's a very keen bureau technician that spots that discrepancy.
Yeah, if it's going to be automated, then it's not the technician that's going to see it. It's going to be a computer that will have a black and white
Which is back
scenario.
to-
So it
back
needs a
to-
tolerance built in so that it can
tolerances.
take. Yeah, exactly.
The same on the exchange. There's a whole piece around tolerances for values, like exchange rates, like percentage values.
Okay.
What's your question?
So the question is, do people agree that it makes sense for it to be a warning rather than an error? So it wouldn't stop it going through and being stored in the risk data store, but it would just flag it as a warning if there is a disproportionate.
Okay, and that's going back to whom? The syndicate that's on the receiving end of the disproportionate signing down, or the broker, or who
No,
receives the...
it would be whoever submitted the contract to the digital gateway.
Okay, so it's come off a PPL platform. Who on the contract, which party on the contract is going to be alerted to that warning?
The person who submitted it, which I think is generally the broker.
Yeah, from a gateway point of view, it's back to the submitting platform, which could be, Sue says, could be the broker system. It could
Okay, that's
be,
a fair point. So it's for the your working assumption is the platform. I'm not disagreeing with it, but just for everyone else's benefit, your working assumption is the source platform that submitted the CDR will be clever enough to work out who to present any errors and warnings back to, which I completely agree with.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And would this be an example, Ed, of where the digital services would or would not be able to be utilised if this warning was not resolved?
Would not obstruct later TA processing. An unresolved error would, I think, was the principle last time.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's it, Rob.
Yeah, the warning doesn't stop it being stored in the risk store and things continuing. If it's an error, it's like a hard stop, and it won't be loaded to the risk data store and have to be fixed. So what we're saying is we would put it as a warning, so it wouldn't stop it proceeding, because it might be correct if disproportionate signing was allowed, but it would raise the flag so that someone could check it's correct.
Okay, but it could still go into the automated premium settlement. Yeah. Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense to put it as a warning and not as an error. People, I presume, does anyone disagree that that's the right thing to do? Okay, I'll take silence as the fact that you're all agreeing, but okay. So we'll now move on to the...
Sorry,
Sorry,
Susie, coming in right at the end. There is something in the backlog for the CDR. It's been raised by Nick Parker to have some way in the CDR to identify disproportionate signing downs. We haven't looked at that just yet because it isn't something that kind of fit the scope that we were at the time. But I think for now it's good to go with this working assumption. But there may be something, and we still need to work with the joint venture on this. In the case we can codify and understand what happens in those disproportionate signings, and it's something that people want to accept onto the CDR, it may be added in the future.
Okay, so and were that the case, then potentially that would mean a change to the rule. So we'd have one rule when the flag is there and one rule when it's not, and it may affect whether it be a warning or an error.
Yeah, but for now, it's
Yeah.
correct that we don't have anything in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just say, it's Julie from Willis. We were invited to this by James Livett around the CDR and the TA and the FA, so we are forwarding this on to our placing colleagues, the recordings. So I just obviously I can't really comment on decisions, so I think it's Richard Clarkson who's our representative, so I'm forwarding all this stuff over to him so he can clarify and go through these.
Okay, thanks for calling that out. Obviously, just come back to us if there's anything, or get him to come back to us if there's anything that he disagrees with or has a comment or some other feedback.
Yeah, okay, cool, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before I move on? Okay, I'll move on to the next one. So we're now jumping to sort of
I'll just put my question in the chat box. So what if the warning is ignored? Will this have impact on the claim submission then?
If the warning's ignored, then the record will be in the risk status store, and when the claim or premium is processed, and any validation checks against the risk record, they'll go ahead with it in its state that it is. So I guess it depends. They'll have their own checks during premium and claims processing, but in terms of validating it against the risk record, it will be validated against that version that's been loaded.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the proposed business validation rules for digital gateway. So the first point to make, so the first set is the rules around broker share and order fields. So an important point to make is in the CDR, there's only one set of broker share and order fields. So there's broker share percentage and broker share amount and currency. There's order percentage and order amount and currency. So the key thing is but there are two fields for the basis. So there's the written lines basis and the sign lines basis. So that set of fields for broker share and order could be, it has to basically be overwritten if something changes between written line basis and sign line basis. So when we're doing our validation, we will validate the broker share and order fields against the written line basis at the first stages of the journey, so during unconditional written line and placement complete stages, and we'll validate those fields against the sign line basis at the stages sign line advice and pre-accounting. Now, from my understanding, most of the time the written line basis and the sign line basis are the same, but there are two fields for it, and there are two fields for a reason, because sometimes they're not. So just to make it clear that when we're doing this validation, it'll be against whichever basis field is the appropriate one at the stage of the journey for the record being submitted. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So the first thing is, depending on the basis that's been chosen, the accord checks will make sure that certain things are true. So the first thing is, if it's percentage of whole, then the order percentage must be 100%. And the broker share percentage must be populated with a value up to and including 100%. If it's percentage of order, the order percentage must be less than 100%, and the broker share can be populated with a value up to and including 100%. So those are the ones around percentage. If the order is expressed as an amount and currency rather than a percentage, then the sign line basis is part of whole. So the order amount and order amount currency must be populated. The order amount must equal the sum insured or limit amount. And the broker share percentage must be populated with the value up to and including 100%. Or the broker share amount is populated with an amount up to and including the order amount. And the broker share currency is the same as the order currency. And then for part of order, which I understand is rarely used, if at all, then basically for this one, the order amount currency must be populated. The order amount must be less than the sum insured or limit amount. the broker share percentage must be populated with a value up to and including 100%, or the broker share amount is populated with an amount up to and including the order amount, and the broker share amount currency equals the order amount currency. Hopefully those all make sense to you. I'm just going to jump very quickly to the appendix just to make the point here that at the moment it is possible to get these mixed up, but it's wrong to do this. So at the moment, DXT, they don't go back and get it changed. They just work it out and make sure that it works. But what will happen now is the validation is, it says here IROS validation, but in fact it will be the Accord validation will force the basis to be assigned correctly. So the point of those rules, let me jump back in here, is to make sure that the way the order and the broker share and order fields have been populated matches to the basis that's been given. So I'll pause there.
Can I ask a question? Going to the CDR, we have those pairings that you've got, you know, sort of whether it's a percentage and a basis or whether it's an amount, etc. And I don't think the rules specifically say you can't enter all four. Now,
they do actually in the CDR record on the Airtable. It's one or the other.
Yes, but it's if it's not null, then fill it out, or don't fill it. It doesn't say if it's not null, don't fill it out. It says if it's null, if one pairing is null, then fill this one out. So I'm just flagging up the rules are, from a codified point of view, maybe not as tight as they possibly could be if you gave them to a programmer to do rather than to a human being that would be putting, take this the right way because I am a programmer, putting a certain element of common sense over it.
So I just need to understand what you're saying. You're saying these rules are not tight enough?
No, these rules are fine. I'm just saying when somebody presents the CDR, so the rules about putting the data into the CDR, not your rules the other end interpreting what they have been said. I think it is still possible that somebody, when you've got those pairings, and they happen in other places in the CDR as well, that actually they could send all four as effectively, I'm sending a percentage and a basis, and by the way, that is the equivalent of an amount and this and the amount of money. It certainly says, if you've left one pair blank, then you must fill out the other, but it doesn't do the inverse. And it might just be something that from beginning, it's more to do with the CDR team, we need to make sure that you are testing on one pair being present and the other pair not being present. Otherwise, you'd have to test across them, across the pairs.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like something that we probably just need to go back.
Yeah. It's more CDR bit. It's more the CDR end than it is here. No criticism here. It's just we want to give you the right data and not end up with the check getting a bit confused.
Okay, we've got some people from CDR on the call, but we can just take that one away.
I've taken a note of this.
Thanks, Harry.
Akash has got his hand up apparently.
Yeah, I've got one quick comment here, and it's something I think we just need to double check and check on. It's your order amount must be equal to the sum insured or limit amount. That might be correct, but I think we just need to make sure and check that that is correct in all of the cases, and it's valid to put a validation on that. So I think it's something that we will probably take away and double check the definitions of that and make sure that in the case that you're using it here, it is a valid rule to put in there. Because I know that from a broker perspective, when we've had that in the CDR, because we have you could have a 10,000 per vessel as your sum insured or limit amount. That might not, and if you have 10 vessels, your order amount might not be necessarily just the 10,000 there. It may be the sum of all of that, etc. So I think we just need to double check that, and that rule can actually be valid.
Okay, no, that would be good. The idea behind that is because this is part of whole, it should be like the whole amount. Whereas if it was the next one, which is part of order, then it would be less. But yeah, definitely we need to validate and make sure it's correct. So yeah, that would be good if you could do that and come back.
Will do.
Okay. So was that someone else about to speak? Or did you say, I can't remember whether someone said morning or will do then.
That was me saying will do, don't worry.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm going deaf in my old age. Okay, so does anyone else have any more queries on those 4 rules? Okay, so I'll move on to the 5th rule then. And so the 5th rule is just a check that if it's part of whole or part of order, so based on an amount, then the order amount currency is the same currency as the sum insured. And if it's not, provide a warning. It shouldn't be an error because it might be a valid scenario where there's multi-currency, but it's a check we should do and just flag as a warning. So, and obviously that's been put as a warning across all of the stages for both markets. And then the final point in this slide is just a reiteration of the fact there's no check required on the sum of written lines for all participants because these can add up to anything. So that's the first stage. So I'll move, unless there's any questions, I'll move on to the next bit. Okay, so then we move on to the business rules for validation of sign lines. So at the bottom on the left, we've just got a reminder that broker share percentage is the first value, X%, where order hereon is expressed as X% of Y%. So just to make sure that's clear. So the first rule is for each section, for all types of sign line basis, the sum of the sign lines for all participants on the section must equal the broker share percentage or the calculated broker share percentage. And if they don't, then, this rule is only being applied at sign license advice and pre-accounting stage. And if they don't match to the broker share percentage, then this would be an error and it wouldn't proceed. Now, I'll just point out here that broker share percentage could be 100%. So where it is 100%, then that's making sure the sign lines add up to 100%. But it could be that the broker share percentage is 80%, in which case it's making sure that the sign lines add up to that value of 80%. And that's all dependent on the basis. And what we've worked out, we started off with 4 rules for each different type of basis, but then we worked out that sort of mathematically, if you make it equal to the broker share percentage, then the rule, it's one rule, basically. So do people agree that this should be a hard stop? If the sign lines don't add up to the broker share percentage, it should be an error. I can't actually see if anyone's got their hand up, so if you just speak out.
I honestly have no idea because you've just blown my mind. So I'll leave it to the program. I did post the question.
I think it's fine if it adds up to the broker share, because the broker PAS, to pick your point, Rob, the broker PAS must have started with that figure if it is going to, or the placing platform, if it is going to do the signing mathematics, because that's the figure that would be plugged in. I think if that is the culmination of this test, then I can't see, unless somebody got a pen and paper out, that they should have got it wrong, that a system should have got that wrong. They must land at the same outcome.
Yep, that's what I'm struggling with. We're back in a world, I think, where computers didn't exist and everything was done on paper. I'm not joking there. This is where the origins of some of these rules come from. I'm just sitting here thinking, are we in danger? And Catherine, I know we saw a bit of this in the Part 7 work, where the system and validation at the end of the process had different rules in it to the systems and validation earlier in the process, and it becomes sort of a problem. And I'm sitting here thinking, surely these rules are already embedded in every broker PAS, and is there a sanity check necessary here to make sure that, and just pick one closest to home to you, the Brokershire Enterprise, Desktop, GX Global XP, whatever, take your pick. How consistent are the rules you're proposing here in the gateway which essentially is validating the product of those broker systems and many others. How consistent are these rules with what you've got in the source broker policy admin systems? Because if they're the same, happy days. If they're different, why are they different? I'm not saying different's wrong, I'm just saying we should understand why they're different, because that's going to become an irritant if we're spotting things at the end of the process rather than being avoided at the start of the process.
I think if you build in a tolerance, the same thing as the disproportionate market for 3, it should be fine. It's probably going to be down to a decimal place that somebody's only declared 4 decimal places, and yet actually that you needed all 7 to be able to add up to the broker share. But
Yeah,
if it's
tolerance.
not tolerance, then you're back to somebody doing it manually. You're right. The broker pads should have got this. Be really rather worrying if the broker pads.
Ed, my suggestion, just to give you peace of mind and all of us peace of mind, is you do reach into Zoob or whatever it's called now and ask them, if we applied these rules at the end of the process that your policy admin system starts, is it going to be problematic? There's nothing to be lost from doing that, and everything to be gained, I would suggest.
I think generally these rules here are rules that we want to enforce across the market, and that whilst I appreciate that it would be problematic if a particular software vendor had chosen a different set of rules. I don't think mirroring what a certain software vendor has should be the driving force.
I didn't say mirror. I just said understand if there are fundamental differences, and then be clear why you've got fundamental differences. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying be clear if we're sleepwalking into an issue here by having more rigorous set of rules at the end of the process than we have at the start, which may not be a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. So please don't misread what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think we also need to remember that whilst a lot of this stuff is, it's going to be received by the gateway at a systematic level, the actual origin of the information may have gone through human processes. So, whilst I think a large number of submitters probably are using this in a fully automated way, and so the likelihood of error is low, there will be some participants, no doubt, that do have more manual processes, and there is a potential for error. So I do think some of the approach we need to be taking to validation is a bit around lowest common denominator, because I guess that's what we're trying to do, is protect the whole the whole market, not necessarily just those who are most advanced. It's not specifically this rule, but I think as a general point.
Can I just clarify one thing on Rule 6? You're taking the broker percentage, so that if they have produced an amount, can they produce an amount that you're then translating, and that's with the reference of calculated broker share percentage?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So if that is the case, obviously you're going through you're going through a second mathematical transformation. So there could be a discrepancy that's brought into bear there that needs the tolerance to be wider.
Yeah. No, I've made a note of your point about the tolerance. Yeah. But yeah, that is what that means. So if it's not provided as a percentage, it would be calculated. So thanks for all that feedback. That's all good feedback. Thank you. Did anyone else have any other comments? Okay, I'll move on to Rule 7. So on Rule 7, so this is for each participant on each section. So at participant level, if the sign line basis is percentage of whole or part of whole, then the sign line cannot be greater than the written line. And so again, that rule, we are saying if it breaks that rule, then it would be an error rather than a warning. And so that's when you're basically your broker. So I've got to get this through. Your broker share percentage is basically 100% here, and obviously the part one is like it's an 100% amount. So in that scenario, the sign line cannot be greater than the written line.
Susie, on several of these, just logic that can't be argued with.
Yeah, so it's not so much asking you to validate the logic, it's more that we're putting this as an error and that we're validating this for sign line and pre-accounting stage, and if it fails, it will be an error, not a warning.
And you're proposing an error because it's a mathematical failure.
Yes.
I think that's logic then.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Cool. So the next one, rule 8. So for each participant on each section that has a line to stand, the sign line must equal the written line. So again, we're proposing that we run this rule for sign line advice and pre-accounting stage, and it's an error if it's not correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we move on to the really fun rules. And I think here you're going to have to kind of trust the maths rather than just because we've been through this.
Can you preface it then? Are you saying this is mathematical logic and
Yes.
the conclusion is it's an error because the maths don't work?
Yes. So basically, yeah. So what we're saying is this goes back to the one at the beginning about disproportionate and whether we put this as a warning. So we put this as a warning if it breaks. So basically what we're saying is mathematically, what we're trying to do here is to validate that the lines have been apportioned correctly. So if it's basically for each participant on each section that doesn't, so if the section doesn't have a line to stand, sorry, so if the participant doesn't have a line to stand, so if the participant has a line to stand, we've covered them in rule 8. Okay, so we've already done them. So for all the other participants on the section that don't have a line to stand, if there are no lines to stand on that section, then it's one calculation. And then rule 10 is if there is any one or more lines to stand on that section, then it's a slightly different calculation. And basically what we're saying is if disproportionate signing is not allowed, then these rules absolutely should stand, but we have to put it as a warning, because if disproportionate signing is allowed, then we're saying it's a warning because it might be that disproportionate signing is allowed. So this is based on the way that DXC do this today, and at the moment, so we've been through this and we've confirmed the rules. We do have somebody who's going to use these rules and work through real life examples. That hasn't happened. So we are validating that the maths is correct. And before we actually put them in the system, we will be, making sure 100% that this is correct and that there's not any scenarios where it's not. So that's what we're looking for. But yes, in principle.
So if you had what Akash said earlier, which is that there's a backlog item on the CDR team to say that there would be disproportionate as a field, then would you propose that this moves from a warning to a error?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's because you're missing that extra piece of information, you need to leave it as a warning.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And that's so the appendix is just the different scenarios. So that is the set of rules for sign lines and order.
So managed to get through that quite a lot faster than perhaps anticipated. Are there any, I guess, broader reflections or big gaps that people are spotting within that general theme around sign line and order?
Does it cater for not sure. I think the question possibly is the next level on when it comes to calculating the money as a result. But I've not seen anywhere, Akash, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I can't remember seeing anywhere whether the market being net or gross, it doesn't seem to be featuring very high, but I don't think that affects the actual mathematics of the signing. I think it's then using the resulting mathematics with the money. So I think it's the next level on.
Ed, I forwarded to this group such a lovely chain of emails that I also shared with the CDR Big. This is, and I'll paraphrase, this is I hope an unusual scenario, but one of the managing agents has raised it with us as a problem. It's been going on for the last few years as a consequence of an MRC rule change several years ago. But this is where the broker places the risk on one basis and then when they come to close and technically account it, they change the basis upon which they submit to the bureau. So we've got underwriters that have booked it in their written line and booked the orders on through one lens, and when they receive their signing messages from the bureau, it doesn't match because it's been distorted by the broker's change in approach. So I'm just putting it out there because I've no idea how. Thanks, Catherine. I've no idea how you will deal with that situation when it comes to matching technical accounts and related premium values to a perfectly legitimate CDR submission that's marked as complete and valid. Not for now, but just please, if you could have a look into that, where you've moved on to the next sort of piece of the puzzle, which is technical account processing matching against CDR and the validation that applies there.
Rob, is there any metrics on that? How often that happens?
No.
That's really edge case to me.
I certainly haven't got any. Catherine's just put there that it's not uncommon on energy business. It was Axis actually that drew it to our attention.
Right.
Mr. Livet is very familiar with it and bats it away with the determination of Jeffrey Boycott. For those of you old enough for him.
Right.
Sorry, can I just go back to what you said just to understand it? You're saying that they've already done it at sign line and pre-accounting on one basis. It's only when they come to process the payments they change the basis.
No, they place it on one basis and they technically account on another. Hopefully they don't change to a third horse when they come to settle the thing. That'll be clean. But,
yeah. So you're saying that the sign line basis is one thing, and then when they do the technical account, they use a different basis.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It so probably ends up with the same premium value booked to an underwriter, albeit through a different route in terms of what they're recorded as their written and signed lines and the like. But there's a lady at Axis that we're more than happy to talk to someone about it, whose details are in there. We can facilitate that if it's helpful. Sounds like it's not unfamiliar. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Kat. Energy business seems to be the popular place for doing that for whatever reason.
Okay, no, that because it's something we should flag to the IPOS team as well.
Yeah,
if that's something that happens. Yeah,
that's what's raising it. But if there's any brokers on the call that dabble in, I don't know if Gordon you dabble in energy or not, but it looks like that's where it's prevalent.
We use so what's an example of this? We're said going to do it of.
Have a look in the notes that.
Okay.
I won't try and recite them, but but let me be clear. I think I hope this is firmly in the. Probably in the 10%, or it's in the 20 part of the 80-20 rule. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem we should wrestle with too much for a day one implementation. But if we want to drive for better automation, more extensive automation, I can just see it becoming troublesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. We'll certainly plug that to the IPOS team. Any other reflections? No.
Well, Ed, how much more have you got to do with market SMEs on this topic of validation?
So we've probably taken. Sorry, I'm start again. We are about 2/3 of the way through the existing rules in terms of our analysis. We've not brought all of the rules that we've already now analysed to this group. Yeah. I suspect we've probably got another couple of PIs worth, 1 or 2 PIs. So yeah, that's probably another perhaps 3 or 4 sessions.
Is there going to be a sort of ta-da moment at the end of when you've completed all your analysis and you've sought feedback where you need sort of second opinion? Is there going to be a kind of here is the library of gateway business validation rules that will be applied to CDRs as applicable? Yeah, we will form a effectively here are the set of rules at the end. I guess at the minute we are sort of approaching it from as is, the as is view. I think one of the things that we've identified is there's
At some point, we
Will
need to
they-
flip from the as is to the what is it going to look like.
So there will be an artifact, we'll call it that is called the Gateway Business Rules Library. And is that artifact something you would expect and want customers to sign off on?
Well, I guess this process is a mechanism to go through to validate that what we're putting into the library is correct. But
we're only talking about the things you bring. We're only talking about the things you bring to this process. I'm interested in the 100% sort of output as well.
Yeah, okay, now understood. So we will one things we'll do off the back of these sessions now is we'll provide the full list of the current rules and what we have agreed against that. So that's basically the 100% view. Obviously appreciate that we are partway through the analysis, so some of those are going to be identified as we're going to pick up in the future. But yeah, when we've completed that, there will be a 100% view of these are all the
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So just the other thing I've got in my mind. Sorry, I realise someone's got their hand up. I think we do need to see what is the rule set that's going to work in the gateway. I think that's an artifact. What the origins of those rules are is interesting, but nothing more than that. So what have we landed on as the rule set that apply in the gateway? It's interesting to know how many of those rules are in place today and how many of those rules are new because they're relevant and we can apply them and it's useful to apply them. And I'll just say that the gateway offers and the CDR offers a rich stream of data that you can execute rules against that you don't have in today's process. You've got some data that you put into, let's say, LIDs for premium processing, and a lot of information that you eyeball in a document. And I just think we should open our minds to the possibility that I'm not saying there are any, but there's the possibility that we could have a more extensive rule set applied to a CDR in the gateway because it's a richer data set to play with. That's just a hypothesis, not a moment.
No, I think it's a good hypothesis. I think particularly once data starts flowing, it's going to be easier to identify where where additional rules might be applied, and certainly the new platform is going to be much more flexible in adding those than today's platforms and processes. The validations in the CDR, obviously, we're not covering those in these sessions because they've already been covered in other sessions. Obviously, those are pretty much more extensive than today's validations in terms of at the data level.
Yeah. There's a couple of people with hands up there.
Can't see who's first.
I'll go next. So I think we're talking a lot here about the CDR and validations against that. The question is really, I assume the rules are being written against a Accord spec, but we're just bringing them to the group through the lens of the CDR because that's what they're familiar with. Am I correct? Because the CDR is business data requirements, whereas the Accord message is actually the detail or the technical data requirements.
Yeah, everything is executed against an Accord standard message, but we've sort of abstracted it away in some of these cases.
Makes sense. And will the repository of the business rules, I assume that would be written against the Accord spec, or would that be against the CDR, or is that still to be decided?
So the rules themselves, obviously, there's a way they're executed. I think from an artifact that will be published, I think it's going to be more business facing, and I guess the intention here is more to explain what rules will be executed, and I guess probably most importantly, allow submitting platforms to then understand the sorts of things that could occur and allow them to be able to handle them appropriately. So if we take one of the disproportionate signing rule that we talked about earlier on, that will have a unique, that is a unique rule that will be executed. It will have a series of failures that can be associated to it. The submitting platforms may need to understand how to deal with those particular failures. So it's important that we document that, but it won't. I don't think there's necessarily any that won't necessarily be a technical specification of exactly how that is implemented.
No, thanks. That makes sense.
I think my question is probably on a similar line, but I don't think I've heard it, whether it will or it won't, which is, if the rules are going to be published, I think they should be published with the CDR and they should be subject to a further consultation. Ultimately, I know you've talked about, and this is about sort of record messaging and using platforms for submission. But ultimately, if it's going to result in a rejection, then the business needs to have a fighting chance of knowing what those rules are before they submit anything. And given that there is a high probability for most of the market using transition services and maybe not using platforms, then it would make sense to me that those validation rules are published outside of the technological world, if you like. Is that planned? Is that going to happen? Will there be a consultation?
There's not a plan for a separate consultation. I would say these are slightly different from the CDR rules, and the CDR rules are probably more more structured and less likely to change over time. Some of these rules that we're talking about here are based on external data in some cases, and will change on a more regular basis, just as things like regulatory changes occur. So they're probably not as static as the CDR rules might be, but we're not planning on doing a separate consultation on the specific rules.
Okay, if they're not going to be consulted on, are they going to be published?
Yes, they are going to be public. Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to say, Catherine, my take on this is the Accord rules, for want of a better phrase, are all about how the community gets the CDR right and can put it through the gateway letterbox. These business rules are allied to the use cases for the CDR, the 4 use cases, and to the services that are provided and paid for by underwriters to exercise those use cases. So I'm not suggesting for one moment brokers don't have a keen interest in these rules, because if the rules fail, you're probably going to get some sort of throwback. Same here and in IPOS as well. But the rules are what they are, so that underwriters can receive the services that they want to receive with the confidence that the service outcomes are good outcomes. And I include the Corporation of Lloyd's in that as well, because for the Lloyd's market, the CDR, the technical accounting, all drops into Lloyd's own tax, central tax and regulatory license reporting. So I think the emphasis on these business rules, separate to the Accord level 3 rules, if that's the right phrase, the emphasis is very much upon achieving good service outcomes for the 4 use cases.
I guess for me is,
that's how I've got it arranged in my head anyway.
I guess for me, I just want to be able to provide that service first time.
That would be lovely. That would be absolutely lovely. And I think the simple fact that we've just heard Ed say, and it's quite right, I think, the business rules are going to be published. The number of conversations I've had over the years with brokers to say, how do we know what to get right if we don't know what the business rules are? And it becomes a voyage of discovery. You sort of learn by experience rather than read the book, learn the book, get it right first time.
Amen.
Rob, you had your hand up. That's gone down now?
It's down now. Yeah, I'm just done with it. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Any more from anyone, or are we good to wrap up? If not, what we'll do is we'll send out some actions and minutes off the back of this meeting and Tuesday's meeting, and as I say, we'll send out that full list of the rules, looking through and where we are on each, and which ones we've covered in these in these sessions this week, but also including the ones we cover back in December to give a bit of a full review of where we're looking. But thanks very much for everyone's input.
Sorry, just Julie here, because we haven't got our placing team on here. So is it possible, obviously you sent the recording which I forwarded on from Tuesday, but some of these questions, can they be, when you send the recording, can they be sort of articulated so we can actually get, in case we haven't written notes, but can we just get some key points and discussions that we need to take to our placing team?
Yeah, if you've got items you want to take place in, Tim, do feel free to share the
Yeah, no,
recording.
if there's any, yeah, we'll share the recording, but if there's any sort of really key points here, because as I say, the invite for us was for CDR in relation to TA and FAs, and obviously this is not TAs and FAs, so we need to make sure that we've sent this on to the correct audience within Willis.
Okay, I think the key points and the questions are probably outlined in the materials we sent out, and I think if there's other points, I think it's things that I think your placement team probably have to identify that they think are key.
Yeah.
A key point rather than additional questions that we've got specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your input. Been very helpful. And as I say, we'll send out those meetings hopefully probably next week. I think in reality. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
If you want to stay on, I'll chat to you about the email you just sent.
Thank you.
I've got form on this.
Okay.